Hi, I'm Verity Milligan, and in this particular episode we're going to be exploring Gas Street Basin in Birmingham. There's opportunities to play around with various different filters. So I'll be using the circular polarizer, ND grad, two-stop, and a little stopper as well. So this is one of those days. You've got these really nice fast-moving clouds that are great for long exposure work. You can see we've just had a shower, so the pavement's wet. When I got there and I'd set up to take the shot, it was a bit miserable, it was a bit grey, and it was one of those days when the weather was rolling through quite quickly, so as it had rained, the rain had come down, it sort of created some nice reflections on the pavement. What I really like about this location is you've got a lot going on. You've got a library, you've got trams, and then you've got an opportunity to get some of these wonderful textured clouds. So what I like about this composition is to do with colour. So I'm going to do a long exposure, and when you get the trams coming through, they're blue, and what you've got is kind of a layer. So you've got the blue of the tram, and then you've got the yellow of the library, and then another sort of blue layer of the library, and then the yellow above, and then the kind of grey and blue tones of the sky as well. And when all of that goes together, it just makes for a really pleasing composition. One of the great things about having a leaf filter set is that I've got my adapter, and I've got all kinds of different size adapter. This one's 82mm for my wide angle, so I can pop that on the front. I've got my circular polarizer here, and because you've got a filter holder, it can go on whatever filter holder you've got. It just hooks in and I can secure it, because that helps me play around with what reflections I can get. Make sure there's no reflections in the glass, or I can enhance the reflections in the glass in the library across the way. The joy of having the leaf filter system is that you don't have to just use the one filter, and I've got the circular polarizer in the front, and for stuff like this, for images like this where I want to get a bit of movement, I want to get the traffic coming through, for that I tend to use a two-stop, and just putting that into the filter holder and having that layered up with a circular polarizer enabled me to just extend the shutter speed long enough to get the tram coming through, to get that perception of movement coming through. Just add a bit of narrative, add a bit of dynamicism to the image. Circular polarizer is going to make the light pop, it's going to make the colours pop. It's one of those filters that actually you can't replicate in post. What the leaf filters one specifically does, which I really enjoy, is it just warms stuff up a little bit for me, and I really like that, especially for anything cityscape, anything landscape. It can make an average image just look far more appealing. So it's always the first filter out of my camera bag. Part of being a photographer is adapting to situations, and the composition I wanted was there when we were shooting at the library, but the weather wasn't on my side, so the skies completely cleared. I didn't really have any interesting cloud cover. There wasn't much going on in the image that was appealing to me, so I switched locations. With Gas Street Basin, when I arrive, it really depends on the weather conditions, what I want to get out of it. The water was quite still, the weather was moving fast, but there was still some reflection in the water. So for me, I was using the circular polarizer to bring out that reflection and to really make the image pop. But there was a bit of cloud cover at this point, so I wanted to get some movement in the cloud, but I didn't want too much movement, so the canal boats would end up moving as well. So for me, using the little stopper, which is a 6-stop, rather than a big stopper, just provided enough shutter speed to be able to grab some of the movement in the cloud without causing too much movement of the boats or any of the objects on the water. I love how we've got all the light reflecting in the height, and the circular polarizer just helps to just pop those reflections even more. I think a lot of people use circular polarizers to get rid of reflections, and I love using them to bring them out. I wouldn't use an ND grad here because we've got the really big building that's doing a lot of the work in the image at the minute, because creating some lovely reflections. And I think this is where, for me, the two-stop just comes in so handy and is one of my favourite go-tos. something I like to call a short long exposure, just enough to add some atmosphere to the image to bring out that reflection without distorting any of the rest of the image. Once the shutter speed is set, it's not really something you can replicate in post-production. So without the filters, you're sort of getting 1/50th of a second. And the difference between 1/50th of a second and 1/4 of a second is just smoothing out that surface enough to just make the image just a bit more interesting. I've said it before, it's a difference between taking a snap and actually taking a photograph. I think one of the hardest things to deal with as photographers is clear skies. What the clouds do is they add quite a lot of interest, and especially when we've got a shot here where we're getting the reflection of that landscape, and that's an integral part of the whole composition. And what that forces me to do is consider my choices more. And right now I'm shooting on a 25mm prime lens, and that's quite tight. It's not a hugely wide lens because there's no point, all I'm going to get is a lot of blue sky, and that's not really going to add anything to the shot. So using a 25mm and then using the circular polarizer to bring out the reflections that I am getting in that tight frame will hopefully keep the viewer's interest. What I like about this scene is you've got almost a diagonal of the boat, and then you've got the vertical of the chimney with the Regency Wharf, and the Hyatt Hotel is reflective and it's catching all of that light. The circular polarizer is bringing out all of that detail into a nice tight composition where we've got the reflection of all of it in the canal as well. So it was a tricky afternoon with variable clear skies and a bit of cloud, but I think in the end, using the filters that I had, I was able to get out the image that I wanted from the scene and hopefully show off this part of Birmingham in all its glory via those creative means, and I'm happy with the results.